The phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, yet somehow, it felt like this moment had been coming for years. He hesitated before picking up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hello?" A voice on the other end, shaky but clear, said one simple sentence, "You need to know the truth." And just like that, everything changed. In the blink of an eye, what had once been a normal day now felt like the start of something much bigger. Something that would shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew. What truth could this stranger possibly be talking about? He had no idea. But the mystery surrounding the call was only the beginning. With each word, a deeper question formed: how far would he have to go to uncover what was hidden? As he stood there, frozen in place, the weight of the words started to sink in. This wasn't just a call, it was the start of a journey that would lead him into a world he never imagined. A world full of secrets, deception, and unexpected twists. What was the truth? And why did someone who clearly knew his name, feel the need to warn him? He couldn't let go of the thought. He had to know. And in that moment, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, slicing through the silence of the room. James had been sitting alone in his small apartment, looking out the window at the rain beating against the glass. It was one of those gray, quiet afternoons where the world outside seemed to blur into the mist. He hadn't been expecting a call. He rarely did. So when his phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, his hand froze midair as if it had been struck by lightning. He stared at the screen for a moment longer than he should have, wondering why this particular call felt different. He had never seen this number before, and there was no reason anyone should be calling him on a Tuesday afternoon. Still, something about it nagged at him. Something deep inside him whispered that this wasn't just an ordinary phone call. His thumb hovered over the green button. He could let it go to voicemail. After all, who really needed to speak to him right now? But against his better judgment, he pressed the button and brought the phone to his ear. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was quiet, almost too quiet, as though the speaker was standing far away or hiding in the shadows. "You need to know the truth." James felt the word settle in his mind, like a stone dropping into water. His heart stuttered for a moment, then continued its steady beat, but now it was louder, more frantic. Truth? What truth? Who was this? Why was he being told this? He opened his mouth to ask, but the voice continued, cutting him off before he could speak. "They're watching you," the voice said. The words hung in the air, sharp and tense. He felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice thick with confusion and something else, fear. "Who's watching me?" But there was only a brief silence before the line went dead. James pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at the screen. The call abruptly ended. His fingers tightened around the phone. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been told something important. Something terrifying. Who had called him? And why had they said that? What did it mean? He paced around the small apartment, the familiar surroundings now feeling strangely foreign. His mind raced through every possibility, but none of them made any sense. There was nothing about his life that could explain such a cryptic warning. Sure, his job was dull and routine, but it wasn't the kind of work that attracted attention. He had no enemies, no secret life, no reason anyone would be watching him. He had no answers. But that didn't stop the fear from creeping in. The fear of the unknown, of things that lurked just beyond his understanding. As he sat back down at the kitchen table, he felt the weight of the phone in his hand. The weight of the words. "You need to know the truth." James had never been one to jump to conclusions. He wasn't the kind of person who believed in conspiracy theories or paranoia. But this was different. There was a heaviness to the voice, a sense of urgency that felt real. He couldn't shake it. The room felt colder now, and the walls seemed to close in around him. His mind circled back to the words again. They're watching you. He wondered who they were. Was it some kind of government agency? An ex-girlfriend, angry over some forgotten detail? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. James jumped, his heart leaping into his throat. He hadn't been expecting anyone. Who could it be? He was too far down the rabbit hole of the phone call to think rationally. His feet moved before his mind could catch up, and in a few quick strides, he reached the door. His hand hovered over the knob, hesitation creeping in. Was it a coincidence? Or was someone actually here because of that call? He took a deep breath, then turned the knob and opened the door. Standing on the other side was a man, tall, dressed in a dark suit, his face concealed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Can I help you?" James asked, his voice tight. He didn't know who this was, but the unsettling feeling from the call was still in the pit of his stomach, and now it had intensified. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements deliberate, like someone accustomed to control. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," the man said in a voice that was calm, measured. It was almost too calm, too controlled. "You need to read it." James didn't take the envelope right away. His eyes scanned the man's face, trying to find any hint of what this was about. But there was nothing. Just the cold, indifferent expression of a stranger. The man didn't say anything more. He just stood there waiting. James swallowed. What could be inside the envelope? What was going on? The phone call had unsettled him enough. Now this? He reached for the envelope, his fingers brushing against the paper. The second he touched it, something inside him told him that once he opened it, things would never be the same. He hesitated again, but then he tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As he unfolded it, the first thing he saw was a name, Evelyn Marshall. His breath caught in his throat. Evelyn Marshall? That name had been buried deep in his past. He hadn't thought about her in years, not since the accident. She was a name tied to a tragedy, a loss that had haunted him for so long. He scanned the rest of the page. There was a short message. Evelyn didn't die in the accident. She's alive. And you're the only one who can find her. James' mind reeled. His heart skipped a beat. What was this? How could this be possible? Evelyn was dead. He had seen the reports, had been at her funeral. How could she be alive? He read the note again, hoping the words would make sense, but they didn't. The message was as cryptic as the phone call. Why had someone sent this to him? Why now? The man standing in front of him seemed to know exactly what he was thinking. He didn't flinch, didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. "Who are you?" James finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began walking away, his footsteps slow and deliberate. As he reached the stairs, he paused, then looked over his shoulder. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice carrying across the empty hall. "And when you do, you'll wish you never opened that letter." With that, he was gone. James stood there, holding the letter in his trembling hands. The mystery was deeper now, far more tangled than before. Evelyn Marshall. She's alive. The truth, whatever it was, had just become much more complicated. And he had no idea where to start unraveling it. But one thing was certain, the truth was out there, waiting for him to find it. And he would stop at nothing to uncover it. James sat motionless in his apartment, the envelope with Evelyn Marshall's name still clenched tightly in his hands. The words on the paper swam before his eyes, his mind struggling to make sense of it all. Evelyn didn't die in the accident. She's alive. And you're the only one who can find her. The sudden rush of memories hit him like a freight train. The sound of screeching tires. The headlights of the car coming straight at them. The terrible crash. He remembered it all, vivid as though it had just happened yesterday. Evelyn had been in the car with him. She had been by his side that night. She had died there, or so he thought. But now, this letter. She's alive. James's hands began to shake. He placed the letter on the table and stood up, walking back and forth in his apartment. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in on him. Nothing made sense anymore. He had spent years dealing with the grief, accepting the fact that Evelyn was gone. And now, someone was telling him that she was alive? The knock at the door startled him again, but this time, it wasn't a surprise. His heart skipped a beat as he moved toward it, his steps hesitant but purposeful. Who could it be now? Was it the same man who had delivered the letter? Was someone else involved in this bizarre situation? He opened the door slowly, his hand trembling as he gripped the knob. Standing in the hallway was a woman. She was tall, with short brown hair that framed her face sharply. Her eyes were intense, piercing even. She didn't smile, didn't offer a greeting, just stood there, her gaze fixed on James. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice firm. James narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping back slightly, unsure if he should invite her in. His mind was still reeling from everything that had happened in the past few hours. This was no coincidence. The woman didn't answer right away. She scanned his apartment, then looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "You've been looking for answers," she said. "And now you're going to get them. But you have to trust me." James didn't know if he could trust anyone anymore. Not after the phone call, not after the strange encounter with the man in the suit. But there was something about her, something that made him hesitate before slamming the door in her face. Maybe it was the urgency in her voice or the fact that she knew so much about him without him ever having met her. Either way, he wasn't about to send her away just yet. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. The woman walked past him without saying another word. She made her way into the living room and sat down on the couch. James closed the door behind her, then stood in the doorway, uncertain about what to do next. She didn't make him wait long. After a few seconds, she spoke again, her eyes still fixed on him. "My name is Sarah," she said. "I've been tracking the people behind what happened to Evelyn." The name hit James like a punch to the gut. Evelyn. He hadn't heard anyone say her name in so long, not since that night. His mind spun, but he tried to keep his composure. "Evelyn? What do you mean, the people behind what happened to her?" James asked, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah hesitated. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "You've been led to believe that Evelyn died in the accident. But the truth is far more complicated than that." James felt his heart race. He could feel the blood rushing to his head, the words echoing in his mind like a drumbeat. "The truth is far more complicated." He opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Sarah cut him off. "Before you ask anything," she said quickly, "there's something you need to understand. This is bigger than you. Bigger than both of us. And if we don't act quickly, we'll both be in danger." "Danger?" James repeated, barely able to believe the words. "What do you mean, danger?" Sarah took a deep breath and looked around the room. "There's a group. They've been watching you for years. They've been manipulating the truth, pulling strings in the background. They made sure you believed Evelyn was dead. They made sure you moved on. But now, things have changed." James felt his throat tighten. He struggled to process what she was saying. A group? Watching him? Manipulating him? It sounded like something out of a spy novel, but this was his reality. His life. "I don't understand," James said, his voice shaking. "Who are these people? And why would they go through all this trouble?" Sarah's gaze darkened, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward. The people behind all of this are far more powerful than you could ever imagine. They have access to resources, information, and networks that most people can't even comprehend. They're not just anyone, they're a covert operation with ties to some of the most influential people in the world. And they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. James's head was spinning. He couldn't keep up with all the new information being thrown at him. But one thing was clear, his life was never going to be the same. So, Evelyn, James began, his voice faltering. She's not dead? She's been alive this whole time? Sarah nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. She's alive. And she's in hiding. They took her. And now, they're hiding her from the world. They've erased her existence, and they're keeping her under their control. James shook his head, trying to make sense of everything. Why me? He asked. Why are they involving me in this? What do I have to do with it? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a file. She slid it across the table toward him. This is the information we have, she said quietly. It's everything I've been able to uncover so far. If you want to know the truth, you need to read it. James stared at the file, his heart pounding. There was no turning back now. He had already opened the door to a mystery that was far bigger than anything he could have imagined. He reached for the file, his hands trembling as he picked it up. Inside were a series of photographs, documents, and notes. As James flipped through the pages, he saw images of Evelyn, ones he had never seen before, ones that seemed to have been taken after the accident. There were documents that looked official, but the text was blurry, hard to read. As he flipped through more pages, his mind raced, connecting dots that didn't quite make sense. Sarah watched him, her expression unreadable. There's more, she said after a long silence. But it's not safe for us to talk here. We need to move quickly. James set the file down, his mind reeling. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But he knew one thing for sure, this was no longer just a question of Evelyn's death. This was something far bigger, far darker than anything he had ever imagined. And it was up to him to uncover the truth. As Sarah stood up, ready to leave, she gave him one last look. If you want to find her, she said, you need to trust me. You need to be ready for what's coming. James nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. The truth was out there. But was he ready to face it? James sat motionless at the table, the file in front of him a constant reminder of the chaotic storm that had begun to swirl around his life. He ran his fingers through his hair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like an unrelenting force. His thoughts raced, but no matter how fast they spun, one question kept coming back: why me? Why had he been chosen to uncover the truth about Evelyn? Why had this strange woman, Sarah, appeared in his life, offering him pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together? Was this really about Evelyn? Or was there something much darker at play? He glanced at the file once more, then at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. He had spent hours trying to digest the photographs, the documents, but the more he read, the more confused he became. There were no clear answers, only fragments, broken pieces of a much larger picture. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke through his thoughts. James froze, his body stiffening. No one else knew he was here. No one had come to visit him in years, not since the accident. His pulse quickened, and his first instinct was to ignore it. But he knew he couldn't. The stakes had risen too high, and he couldn't afford to run from whatever was happening anymore. He stood up and walked to the door slowly, every step heavier than the last. His hand gripped the doorknob with a mix of dread and anticipation. He opened the door, just a crack, but enough to see who was standing there. A man in a dark suit. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating. He was older than James, probably in his late 40s, with graying hair and a scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a hard, menacing look. "James Thomas?" the man asked, his voice smooth and authoritative. James nodded warily. "Who are you?" The man didn't respond to the question. Instead, he pushed a small envelope into James's hands. "This is for you. You've been digging into things you don't understand. If you want to know the truth, you need to meet us. Tomorrow. The location is in the envelope." Before James could ask anything else, the man turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the night. James stared at the envelope in his hands, his heart pounding. It was sealed, plain and unmarked. No name, no logo. Just an envelope that had already made it clear that there was no going back. He glanced over his shoulder at the file on the table, his mind racing. Was this the moment he'd been waiting for? Was this the chance to finally uncover what happened to Evelyn? Taking a deep breath, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address written in precise, neat handwriting. The location was unfamiliar, somewhere on the outskirts of the city, far away from any major buildings, tucked into a quiet, isolated part of town. James's hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down and went back to the file. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a sliver of hope. He needed to go. He needed to take that step into the unknown. The next morning, the city was eerily quiet as James drove toward the location. It was a part of town he didn't recognize, one that seemed out of place, as if it had been hidden away on purpose. The buildings were older, crumbling in some places, and there was a distinct sense of abandonment in the air. James parked his car several blocks from the address, unsure whether he should proceed on foot. His nerves were shot, but he knew that turning back wasn't an option. The truth was just out of reach, and no matter how dangerous it might be, he had to see it through. He stepped out of the car and walked down the empty street. The sun was barely up, and there was a cold breeze that made him shiver despite the warm weather. As he neared the address, he could see a small, unassuming building ahead. It looked like a warehouse or a factory, nothing special at all. The door was slightly ajar, the faint sound of voices coming from inside. James hesitated, but only for a moment. He took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a few scattered lamps in the corners. It smelled of dust and something else, something metallic that James couldn't quite place. The air was thick with tension, and as he walked further in, he noticed several people standing around, all of them watching him. Sarah was there too. She was sitting on a chair near the back of the room, her arms crossed, a look of resolve on her face. When she saw him, she stood up and motioned for him to come closer. James took slow, cautious steps forward, his mind racing. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear, this was the moment he'd been waiting for. He had no choice but to see it through. "I'm glad you made it," Sarah said as he reached her. James nodded, though his throat was dry. "What's going on here? What is this place?" Before Sarah could answer, the man from last night, the one who had handed him the envelope, appeared. He stood tall, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room. There was an air of authority about him, and James couldn't help but feel a surge of anxiety. "We're not the only ones looking for Evelyn," the man said, his voice deep and serious. "There are others who want to keep her hidden. Keep her away from the world. And they're not going to stop until they've erased every trace of her existence." James felt a chill run down his spine. Why? What's so important about her? What does she have to do with all of this? The man didn't answer immediately. He glanced over at Sarah, who gave a small nod before he turned back to James. "There's a lot you don't know," the man said. "But you're about to find out." He motioned to a table in the corner of the room, where several other documents and photographs were laid out. James walked over to them, his heart racing. As he looked at the images and papers, his mind began to spin once again. These were the same photographs he had seen in the file. The same blurry documents, but now, there were more clues, more pieces of the puzzle. This is just the beginning, the man continued. There are things you need to understand. People who need to be exposed. But we need your help. You're the only one who can do this. James shook his head, still struggling to comprehend everything that had happened in such a short time. But one thing stood out: Evelyn's disappearance was far from ordinary. It was tied to something bigger, something that could change everything. What do I have to do? James asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man met his gaze. You need to find her. Before they do. And when you do, you need to be ready for the truth. James swallowed hard. He had no idea what the truth was, but he knew that it was out there. And he was about to uncover it, no matter the cost. The silence in the room was almost suffocating, each second dragging on longer than the last. James stood frozen, staring at the table covered in documents, photographs, and scattered notes. He had seen these images before, but there was something about them now that made his skin crawl. These weren't just random pieces of information, these were clues. Clues to something so much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The man in the dark suit stood beside him, watching him carefully, as if expecting him to say something. But James couldn't find his voice. His mind was still reeling from the revelation that he had walked into something far more dangerous than a simple missing persons case. There were people willing to go to great lengths to keep the truth hidden. And Evelyn, his old friend, was caught in the middle of it all. Sarah, standing across the room, was still watching James closely. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way she held herself that made him uneasy. She wasn't just a bystander. She was involved in this, and whatever secret she was keeping, it was tied to the very heart of this mystery. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man spoke again. You've seen the photographs. You've seen the documents, he said, his voice low and measured. James turned toward him slowly. I don't understand. All I know is that she's gone. She disappeared. And now, I'm being dragged into some kind of conspiracy that I don't even know how to begin to untangle. The man's lips twitched, as though he were holding back a bitter laugh. It's not a conspiracy, James. It's a war. A war that's been going on for longer than you realize. And you're about to find out just how deep it goes. His words hit James like a punch to the stomach. A war? A war over Evelyn? It didn't make sense. How could a single person be so important? How could a woman who had been his close friend for years suddenly be at the center of something so dangerous? The man continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn's disappearance isn't an accident. It was planned. Every move, every step, was carefully orchestrated. And now, the people who've been pulling the strings are closing in on you. They know you're getting closer to the truth. And they won't stop until you're silenced. James felt a wave of nausea hit him. His knees nearly buckled, but he steadied himself against the table. Who are these people? What do they want from me? The man's eyes darkened. They want to control the truth. They want to keep the world in the dark about what really happened. And Evelyn. Evelyn is the key. She knows something. Something that could expose everything. But they've hidden her away. And now it's up to you to find her before they do. James swallowed hard, the weight of the situation settling in. He had thought he was just trying to find his missing friend. He had thought that by solving this puzzle, he would get answers. But now, everything was changing. He was no longer just searching for Evelyn. He was now a part of something much larger. Something that could cost him everything. Why me? James finally asked, his voice strained. Why did they choose me? Why am I the one they think can find her? The man stepped closer, his eyes locking onto James's. Because you're the only one left who can. You're the only one who knows what Evelyn meant to the people who were involved in all of this. You were her connection to the outside world. You're the missing piece. A cold chill ran through James as the implications of the man's words sank in. Her connection to the outside world? For a moment, the room seemed to spin around him. Everything he thought he knew was crumbling. Evelyn's disappearance wasn't just an isolated event. It was the result of years of secrecy, manipulation, and power plays. And now, James was caught in the middle of it all. I don't know if I can do this, James whispered, his hands trembling. You don't have a choice, the man replied, his voice harsh now. You've already crossed the line. There's no going back. James's head was spinning, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been led here for a reason. As terrifying as it all was, part of him knew that he couldn't walk away. He couldn't leave Evelyn out there, lost and alone, while these shadowy figures closed in on her. Where do I start? He asked, his voice steady now, though his insides were still in turmoil. The man nodded slightly. We've found something. A lead. A location. But we don't know if it's real. That's where you come in. James's heart began to race. What kind of lead? Where is it? The man handed him a folder, its contents sealed. It's a place in the city. A building. We believe Evelyn might be there. But there's one catch. It's heavily guarded. And we don't know who else is watching. James took the folder from the man's hand, his fingers brushing against the cool paper. Inside, there were more photographs, grainy, taken from a distance. A building in the middle of the city. The same one he had passed earlier that morning. The one that felt out of place, tucked away in an isolated corner of the urban landscape. His mind began to churn as he stared at the pictures. He had seen this building before. It wasn't far from here. But it hadn't looked like anything special. It looked like just another abandoned place, the kind of structure you could find all over the city. But now, with everything he had learned, he knew it was far more than that. It was a place of answers. A place that could reveal everything. But it was also dangerous. He could feel it in his gut. Whoever was behind all of this wouldn't just let him waltz in and uncover the truth. You're sure it's her? James asked, though he already knew the answer. The man's face was unreadable. We're sure. And we don't have much time. The people after her won't wait forever. James felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. There was no more sitting on the sidelines. He had to move. He had to go. Okay, he said, his voice hardening with resolve. I'll go. The night before the reckoning. James didn't sleep that night. His mind wouldn't allow him to. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Evelyn's face, her smile, her laughter, and he wondered where she was now, what she was going through. Was she still alive? Was she even aware of how deep this conspiracy went? He couldn't let it go. Not after everything that had happened. There was no turning back now. At dawn, he grabbed his coat, stuffed the folder into his bag, and left the small apartment. The streets were quiet, the early morning fog hanging thick in the air. It was an unusual kind of calm, and it only added to the unease that had settled in his chest. James drove to the building. His car moved swiftly through the empty streets, and soon he was parked on a street corner a block away from the place. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding. It looked abandoned, but James knew better now. It was anything but. He checked his watch, took a deep breath, and began walking. The door was locked, just as he expected. But there was a back entrance, a small alleyway leading to a rusty door that seemed to be barely hanging on its hinges. James pushed it open slowly, the creaking sound echoing in the silent space behind him. What he would find on the other side, he didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure: this was no longer just a search for his missing friend. This was a search for the truth. And the truth was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. James' heart raced in his chest as he quietly stepped through the alleyway, the rusted door creaking shut behind him. His eyes darted to every corner, every shadow that seemed to shift in the dim light. He could hear his breath, sharp and ragged in his ears. Every step felt like it took him deeper into unknown territory. The city around him felt distant now. The streets, the familiar sounds of passing cars, and the morning fog were all forgotten as he moved cautiously toward the building's entrance. The air inside the alley was heavy, thick with the musty smell of decay. It felt like a place long forgotten, yet, there was something about it that made him uneasy, like it was waiting for him. He glanced down at the folder in his hands. It held everything, every clue, every piece of the puzzle that was supposed to lead him to Evelyn. The photo of the building. The notes. The cryptic messages. The man in the dark suit had said this was where everything would change. But James was starting to feel the weight of it all, the pressure of knowing that walking through this door might open up a whole new world of danger. Still, he couldn't stop now. He had to know the truth. James took a deep breath, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The hinges groaned under the strain, and the cold air from the alley followed him in. He stepped into a narrow hallway, its walls lined with old, faded wallpaper that peeled in strips, exposing crumbling drywall underneath. The faint sound of distant voices drifted through the air, a low hum like a whisper of conversation. He froze. His instincts screamed that he wasn't alone. It was then that he heard it, the soft scuff of footsteps approaching from the far end of the hallway. James pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. He couldn't make out the voices, but he could tell they were getting closer. His mind raced. Were they aware of him? Had they known he would come? Then, as if on cue, the footsteps stopped. James strained to listen, waiting for the next sound. A door opened down the hall, and the voices grew louder. He could hear murmurs, words slipping into his consciousness that he couldn't quite make out. Without thinking, James moved forward. He crept down the hall, trying to keep his footsteps as silent as possible. He reached a corner and peered around it. What he saw made his blood run cold. A large, open room stretched out in front of him, filled with steel tables and computer screens. A group of men in dark suits stood around the tables, talking in low tones. The flickering light from the monitors illuminated their faces, but James couldn't make out their features. Suddenly, one of the men turned, and their eyes met across the room. James' breath caught in his throat. They knew he was here. Without wasting a second, he backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. The last thing he wanted was to get caught, but he couldn't ignore the fact that something was happening in that room, something he needed to see, something that could bring him one step closer to Evelyn. But as he turned to make a quick escape, he bumped into something. The loud crash echoed down the hallway. "Who's there?" a voice shouted from the room. His mind raced. He had no choice now. He couldn't just turn and run. They were already onto him. He had to face whatever came next. James spun around and bolted down the hall, his footsteps pounding against the concrete floor. He reached the door and flung it open, but just as his hand touched the handle, a figure appeared at the other end of the hallway. It was Sarah. She looked different now, tired, worn, but her eyes held something that James couldn't place. Something urgent. "James," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. "You shouldn't be here." Before he could respond, she grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows of a nearby alcove. "They're watching," she said, her voice trembling. "This place isn't what you think. You're not ready for what you'll find." James' mind raced. "What do you mean? What is this place? And why are you here?" Sarah hesitated, looking around them nervously. Her hand trembled as she gripped his arm tighter. I didn't want to get you involved. I never wanted you to be dragged into this. But now, it's too late. She stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. I've seen what they can do. I've seen it firsthand. And Evelyn, she knew too much. She knew what they were capable of. James' heart skipped a beat. Evelyn? What do you mean? What did she know? Sarah looked down, avoiding his gaze. It's not just about what she knew. It's about what she was part of. This whole thing, it goes deeper than you think. I didn't understand it at first either, but now I see the truth. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. James was losing control. He needed answers, but every turn led to more questions. What truth was she talking about? What had Evelyn gotten involved in? Tell me, he demanded, his voice desperate. Tell me everything. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. There's a reason they're after her. And it's not because she's just some random person. She's connected to something far bigger, something dangerous. James felt his stomach twist. The danger he'd been sensing, the growing fear, was no longer a distant thought. It was real. He was in the middle of something that could cost him everything, his life, his safety, his future. I know you don't understand, Sarah said quietly. But you need to trust me. There's a reason I came back. There's a reason I've been following you. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She had been following him. Why? He asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. Why follow me? What do you want from me? Sarah's eyes met his, and there was a flicker of guilt in them. I needed you to find the truth. You're the only one who can. Before he could process what she had said, the sound of a door opening down the hallway made both of them jump. Go! Sarah hissed. Get out of here. I'll cover you. James didn't hesitate. He ran down the hall, heart pounding in his chest. Every footstep echoed as he moved swiftly toward the exit. He could hear the sounds of pursuit behind him, but he didn't dare look back. He couldn't afford to be caught now, not when he was so close. He reached the door, yanked it open, and dashed out into the alley. He didn't stop running until he reached his car, slamming the door shut behind him. His mind raced, and his breath came in quick, shallow bursts. He had barely escaped. Barely. But the question still burned in his mind. What was Sarah hiding? What had she seen? And, most importantly, where was Evelyn? As James drove away from the building, the weight of everything crashing down on him, he realized something chilling. This was only the beginning. Whoever was behind all of this was not going to let him walk away so easily. He was in deeper than he ever thought possible. He had to find Evelyn before it was too late. James' grip tightened on the steering wheel as he sped through the empty streets, his mind racing. The events of the past few days felt like a blur. Every moment, every encounter, seemed to carry him closer to a truth that he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But now, there was no turning back. He had to find Evelyn. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face, pale and full of regret, as she'd urged him to get out. Something about her words still haunted him. You're the only one who can find the truth, she had said. And now, it felt like he was running against time. The alleyway, the hidden building, the mysterious men in dark suits, it was all starting to make sense in pieces, but the whole picture was still beyond his reach. Evelyn had been involved in something bigger, something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And now, he couldn't even trust Sarah completely. Had she been a part of it all along? Or was she just another pawn in a game he didn't yet understand? James slowed as he reached the outskirts of the city, the streets becoming darker and more isolated. He glanced at the GPS on his phone, tracking the coordinates from the last clue he'd received. The location was remote, a small farmhouse on the edge of town. He had no idea what to expect, but it felt like this was the place where everything would finally come to a head. His headlights illuminated the dusty gravel road leading to the house, a faint glow in the distance. The farmhouse looked abandoned, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. The silence surrounding it was unsettling, and for a moment, James hesitated. Was this the right place? What if it was a trap? But there was no other choice. He couldn't turn back now. James parked his car at the side of the road and stepped out into the cold night air. His breath misted in front of him, and his shoes crunched on the gravel as he moved toward the farmhouse. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, stepping cautiously into the shadowy interior. The inside of the house was dimly lit, the air stale with the scent of mildew and dust. Old furniture was scattered around, and the floorboards creaked under his weight. It looked as if the place had been abandoned for years. But James could feel the weight of something lurking here, something waiting for him. "Evelyn," he called softly, his voice echoing in the emptiness. There was no answer. He moved deeper into the house, each step making the silence more oppressive. Then, he heard it, a soft rustle coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. James approached the door slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. With a deep breath, he pushed it open. Inside, the room was small and dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. And there, sitting at a table, was Evelyn. She looked pale, her hair disheveled, but she was alive. Her eyes locked with his, filled with a mixture of fear, relief, and something darker. "James," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I couldn't leave you out here alone." Evelyn shook her head. "It's not safe, James. They'll come for you too." "Who?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Who are they? What's going on here?" Evelyn stood up, her hands trembling as she took a step toward him. "You're not ready to hear this. None of us are." But James wasn't going to back down now. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Tell me, Evelyn. Tell me everything. We're in this together now." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. Then, with a deep sigh, she spoke. "They've been watching us for months," she began. "Maybe longer. I thought I was just caught in something small, something that wouldn't matter in the end. But I was wrong. The people behind this, they're not just criminals. They're a network, a secret organization. And they have a far-reaching influence. They don't want us to know the truth. They'll do anything to keep us from it." James listened, his mind trying to process the flood of information. What truth? What's so important? Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows as if searching for something, or someone. "The truth about our world. About what's really happening behind closed doors. The lies we've been told. The manipulation. The control. It's all connected, James. And the ones pulling the strings? They have the power to change everything." Her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought was real, was a lie. The world he'd been living in was built on a foundation of secrets, and now, he was caught in the middle of it. Evelyn continued, her voice growing more urgent. "They've been using us, using people like me and Sarah, because we know too much. We've been part of their experiment, James. They're trying to control our lives, our choices, everything. And if we don't stop them, they'll keep going. They'll keep manipulating people, controlling them like puppets on strings." James felt the weight of her words settle in his chest, suffocating him. This wasn't just about Evelyn. This was about something far bigger. He had no idea how deep the conspiracy went, but he could feel the gravity of it pulling him further into the unknown. Why me? He asked. Why did they come after me? Why did they drag me into this? Evelyn's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost sorry. Because you were close to the truth. You were asking the right questions. They knew you'd find us eventually. And once you did, they couldn't let you leave. You're a threat to them now. James swallowed hard. So what do we do now? We fight, she said, her eyes flashing with determination. We expose them. We take them down before they can do any more damage. Before James could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the room. He turned quickly, his heart racing. Evelyn's eyes widened in fear. They're here, she whispered. James didn't have time to think. He grabbed Evelyn's arm and pulled her toward the back door. But just as they reached it, the door slammed open, and a group of men in dark suits stepped into the room. James, Evelyn, one of them said, his voice cold and commanding. You're both coming with us. James took a step forward, placing himself between the men and Evelyn. I won't let you take her. You won't get away with this. The man smiled, but it was a cruel, empty smile. You've already lost, James. There's nothing you can do now. Evelyn squeezed his hand. James, we can't fight them here. We need to get out, now. James didn't hesitate. With one last glance at the men, he grabbed Evelyn and ran. They barreled out the back door into the darkness, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. But this time, they weren't going to stop. They couldn't. The night stretched out before them, uncertain and dangerous. But for the first time in what felt like forever, James had hope. He wasn't going to back down. And neither was Evelyn. They had come too far to let the truth be buried any longer.